We are talking about the underrepresentation of visible minorities in politics. News came out recently in the last few months about how only 6 of the 208 elected officials in the Montreal agglomeration are of visible minorities. Why is that? What needs to change? And does this go further than just at the municipal level? Well, to talk about this, we have joined a great panel for you today. I'll start with Fo Niemi. He is with CRAR, the Center for Research Action on Race Relations. Welcome, Fo. We have Kathy Wong right here to my left, president of the Conseil des Montréalaises. Alan de Souza, mayor of Saint Laurent. Thank you so much for coming in. And finally, Peter Francis, the president of the Black Coalition of Quebec. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Mr. de Souza, I want to start with you. You were born in Pakistan, moved to Montreal as a teenager. You've been in municipal politics for close to 30 years now. How would you say the landscape, the demographics of the city has changed over the years?
Well, in the last 30 years, we've just seen time after time Montreal becoming more and more diverse. So I think at one point in time, we used to see people living in communities and often congregating in those communities, whether they be the Italian community, the Jewish community, the Greek community, but that's no longer the case. Across the board, we're seeing a diversity that is probably the wave of the future. And we've seen this build up as there have been crises in the world, as there have been wars, civil wars, natural disasters. People have come in Canada. Montreal has opened their arms wide, and people don't just congregate anymore. They live wherever. My own street where I live, I've got 8 different nationalities just in my neck of the woods around the house where I live. And that's representative of what it's like across the community.
An interesting point when we were talking about this, you let me know that the borough of Saint Laurent is actually the most diverse neighborhood in Montreal, perhaps maybe even in the province of Quebec.
Well, I think we're probably one in the top 10 in Canada. We've got over 166 different ethnicities. Over 60% of the population was born outside Canada. But our trademark is that people have found a way to succeed, to live in peace and harmony, and that's something that we promote actively in our civic values.
So having said all that, Peter Francis, let me turn this over to you because you're at the forefront of this initiative at City Hall, pushing for more diversity. Having heard everything Mr. de Souza just said, why aren't more visible minorities involved in politics, in your opinion?
Well, the reasons are many. We have to address it from the perspective of whether or not the political parties are engaged in some form of affirmative action, affirmative arent policies. What is unacceptable at this point is in Montreal, we have approximately 35% of the population belonging to visible minority groups. Yet, in some political parties, we have zero representation of these people. Overall, it's 3%, but in some of the parties, there's actually zero. So what needs to be done, actually, is education, educating the different parties the importance of cultural diversity. Second, what also needs to be done is an inclusive strategy that respects and encourages minority individuals to participate in the political process.
Fo, I want to turn this over to you because we've been, of course, discussing it at a municipal level, but you've been working with and fighting for visible minority rights for many, many years. As you said before we came on, too many years to count. This is an issue we're not only seeing at the municipal level, correct?
No, it's at all levels. Actually, from school board levels up to the federal level. I think with school board, it's the closest to the people, then the city level, it's very close. Usually the city election gets 4,000 or 5,000 votes to get elected. So I think part of the thing is people have to be engaged. People have to take the initiative to get involved and to speak out and to really feel that they can make a difference. I think we have to reinstill the sense of possibility and the sense of opportunity for people.
You were saying how many complaints you get? Was it per month or per year?
No, average we get about 100 and something complaints of individual, particularly in the area of employment at all levels, particularly in the public sector. And I think the public sector is very problematic because there's a gross underrepresentation of minorities, racialized people at all levels of the public service. And it's been for years. In 1981, the Quebec government set out to increase minority representation in Quebec civil service from almost 2 to 9%. Today, it's not even 8%. So I think we have a very, very systemic problem.
Kathy, the mission of the Conseil des Montréalaises, which you preside over, is to advise public administration on equality and specifically also the status of women and women's issue. We've been speaking about visible minorities, but how would you say women fit into all this?
Well, we believe that it is even a harder task to involve women from a racialized background or from visible minorities. What we see often are women that are not stimulated into politics and that do not see themselves in politics, first of all because they don't have those models in front of them, but also because their community or what they see around them do not represent what they see themselves in the future. But one thing that is really important is for us to encourage civic participation. For us, politics does not necessarily start in the city council, but it starts when there are consultations, when there are city municipal actions, and we want to make sure that women participate in those actions also. So for example, when we look at initiatives like the Public Consultation Office of Montreal, when we look at commissions, when we look at different initiatives like those, we want to make sure that women, and especially women from different origins, get to participate and get their voice heard. But we see that even in those initiatives, sometimes it's hard because they have to balance work and family. They don't speak the language. So there are different barriers that we have to identify and that we have to bring down.
And speaking on those barriers, after the break, I want to talk about how we break those barriers and how we move forward and do better. You're watching Breakfast Television here on City. Stay tuned for more.
Everyone has a different point of view, and if you want to have like a good solution, then it should include everyone's point of view.
Us minorities, we need to have a representation too.
And I think that they should monitor who they hire, and there should be at least one person from each different visible minority that should take part in it. I absolutely think that that should be done.
Welcome back. So before the break, of course, we are talking about the underrepresentation of visible minorities in politics. We talked about how do we break those barriers, get more people engaged. I want to turn it back to you, Mr. D'Souza, because, of course, you started out very young. You were bitten by the political bug. How do we get more young people, more visible minorities to run for politics? Because there is this sort of conception that you have to have a lot of money to do it and you have to have a lot of connections to do it.
Well, you don't. When I first ran, I think I was pretty young. I was 23 years old. I worked during the day. I knocked on doors at night, and I put up my posters between 8 at night and 8 in the morning. It was a pretty crazy time. But I think what happens is that if you work hard in the community and you build and your networks and your contacts and you're involved in the community, that's the best way of doing it. I don't believe that affirmative action in political parties is the solution, because I've never seen people get elected at the municipal level because of a political party. Generally, municipal politics is retail politics. It's people you see at the arena, people you run into at your Provigo or your Pharmaprix. It's people whose kids are in the same activities as yours. And so it's that type of community connection that allows you to know what the community needs and to do it. And it can't just be limited to visible minorities. I mean, we've got people across the board from different countries, women, different people with different handicaps, etc. I subscribe to the view that City Council has to be as representative as possible. But we need people who can build bridges. Yes. Not people who come from one community and says, well, vote for me for this reason. In the Montreal of today is so diverse that if you don't have people who can connect with other communities, then you're doomed to failure.
Would you agree with that, Peter?
Well, I mean, look, we have to ask the question to the different political parties that's in power presently. Why is it, for example, that the political attaches of these individuals are also not minority? We're talking about the secretaries in the offices most of the time.
What do we do, Peter? How do we change that?
Well, as Alan said, if we are going to prepare people to run for office, we have to get them in the community. And if the parties are not engaging these individuals, introducing them to people in the community, then how are they going to break that barrier? Because the attaches are not minority. The people in the offices are not minority. So once election time comes around, they throw a lot of minorities into the pool, and the community is really not familiar with them. So it has to be a process that has to start now. It has to start on a daily basis, and if there's a true interest, they have to prepare minority candidates to run for office and to be eventually elected.
Well, and especially on the municipal level, you know, it is the level where people are the closest to politics, where they're the most involved, and where it is the easiest, I believe, to get involved in politics. So it is the level where we have to start convincing and involving visible minorities in politics. And also, when we look at affirmative action, one of the young ladies said earlier that we have to do an analysis. We have to bring up the statistics and bring up the numbers. And that's one thing that we don't do enough. At the City of Montreal, we have access to different numbers, but we don't have that much access to numbers on immigration, on visible minorities. And that's one thing we have to start working on so that we can know what kind of successes that we're going through, what kind of challenges we're going through. And until then, it is hard to know if we are really doing our job or not, actually, in representing the visible minorities.
Would you say, Fo, though, that have we made any improvements, would you say? I mean, in the last, with Justin Trudeau and his parliament, we're seeing more women, more visible minorities. Are we making those improvements, you think, Fo?
I think at the federal level, I think we've seen quite a lot of change, even with the NDP at official opposition in the last parliament. We've seen quite a significant number of minorities of all kinds in areas even outside of Montreal. It's at the provincial level, I think, that we have to really look at, and the city level, obviously, there's a big problem. When we look at Laval and Longueuil, I think those areas are very, very multicultural, multiracial, and we still have practically lily white city councils. So there are obstacles there, and I think the structure, more than just a party, I think all kinds of institutions have to really review their policies and practices, but ultimately it comes down to the individual. I think political involvement, it starts in the family.
Yes.
You gotta get educated, you gotta get consciousness raised, and you gotta feel that you have to be involved, you know, doing the simple things. And I think we have to find ways to re-engage this young generation to get them involved in the political process, not outside of it.
And like you said, and it starts with the family, you know, parents being that model. Were your parents a model for you, Alan, and that's how you started out?
Not quite. Not
Not
quite.
quite? Okay.
My parents came to this country and they wanted to work hard and they wanted
Yeah.
to give their kids a chance. But the fact that today I'm mayor of Saint Laurent shows that that is possible. If it's possible for me, it's possible
Yes.
for any community or
And-
anyone who comes here. And I go back to what Fo's talking about. It starts from the individual. I don't think we can institutionalize it to say that our institutions have to do these things. Yes, they have to do that. But I think if you want to succeed, you've got to go to bat. You've got to equip yourself. You have to learn how to campaign. You have to learn how to deal with people.
Right.
You have to learn how to put all of these things. There's no school for it, Laura.
No, absolutely.
You can't take a course
Yeah.
at McGill and say, well, now I'm ready to go and enter politics.
Yes.
But at the same time,
We have to, unfortunately, we're out of time. You see, we want to continue this conversation because there's so much more that we want to talk about, but we're going to have to end on that point, unfortunately. Thank you all so much for coming in today. And of course, we will be keeping an eye on the next process on what happens with this. Thank you very much.